He was pulled from his first-class seat like a criminal, hands not cuffed, but pride shackled by perception. His only crime was his skin tone. There was no warning, no apology. Just 3 flight attendants, a manufactured system flag, and a woman in pearls who declared, "That seat doesn't belong to people like him." Phones recorded. Passengers murmured, and Malcolm Wren, composed and still, refused to move until they made him. What no one knew, not the crew, not the first-class passengers sipping vintage rosé, not even the CEO of the airline watching the footage in real time, was that this wasn't just any black traveler. He was the person with more influence over their company's future than they could ever imagine. This isn't just another story about racial profiling at 30,000 feet. It's the story they never saw coming. If you believe in fairness, if you've ever been dismissed, overlooked, or told you don't belong, keep watching. This ending changes everything. Malcolm Wren stepped into the Atheris Air Private Terminal at Cranford International, an airport designed for those who didn't wait in lines. They funded them. Quiet luxury enveloped the space. The marble floors beneath his polished Santoni shoes glistened like still water. On the walls, curated sculptures and digital canvases stood not just as decor, but declarations. You made it here. This terminal wasn't about luxury being given. It was expected. Malcolm walked through it all with the serene confidence of a man who belonged, yet eyes followed, eyes that questioned. He wore a deep charcoal overcoat draped over a tailored navy turtleneck, both cut with surgical precision. He walked with calm purpose. But it didn't stop the woman with the designer tote from clutching it a little tighter. Her husband looked Malcolm up and down and didn't smile. Malcolm didn't care. He didn't dress to fit in. He dressed because he could. At the espresso bar in the lounge, a young barista with unnervingly perfect teeth intercepted him mid-reach. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, lips tight and fake. "This area is reserved for Obsidian elite clients only." Malcolm, silent, pulled out his boarding pass and held it steady. The moment she saw 1A and the black Obsidian designation, her smile faltered. "Oh, Right, sorry, just a few mix-ups lately." Her voice cracked. She gestured awkwardly toward the machine. Malcolm nodded once, picked up his cup, walked away, face unreadable. The lounge was arranged like a grandmaster's chessboard, leather seats aligned, lighting deliberate, angles perfect. Malcolm chose a window seat, far from others. From there, he watched ground crews glide like synchronized cogs of a billion-dollar empire. He checked his watch. Boarding in 20 minutes. He glanced around. Most guests were older, white, dressed in muted symbols of wealth, platinum watches, silk scarves, power suits. A few looked at him openly, some curious, some skeptical. He didn't return their gaze. He didn't have to. He felt it. He always did. When boarding began, Malcolm walked to the Obsidian-only lane. The gate agent scanned his pass and paused just a beat too long before recovering her professional smile. "Welcome aboard, Mr. Wren." He nodded and walked on. At the jet bridge, a tall flight attendant with ice-blonde hair stood waiting like a gatekeeper to Olympus. "Welcome," she said, precise and clipped. Her eyes dropped to his boarding pass, then flicked back to his face. "You're in 1A," she noted. Another pause, then a too smooth smile. "Right this way." At his seat, Malcolm stowed his leather carry-on and sat down. But something was off. No amenity kit, no welcome drink, no dinner menu. Across the aisle, 1B and 1C were fully prepared, slippers placed, champagne poured, menu cards folded neatly. He pressed the service button. No one came. 10 minutes passed before a junior flight attendant appeared. "I'm so sorry, sir," she stammered. "Looks like your amenities weren't loaded. We'll get those to you shortly." He nodded once. She didn't meet his eyes. Passengers continued boarding. The last few filtered in. Then came a man in a bold plaid blazer who dropped into his seat across from Malcolm. He looked over and grinned, not kindly. "You sure you're in the right seat, partner?" Malcolm kept his voice even. "I am." The man chuckled. "Just checking." The man in the loud navy checkered blazer slumped into his seat across the aisle, flashing Malcolm a grin that was anything but friendly. "You sure you're in the right seat, partner?" Malcolm didn't flinch. His voice was cool, his expression unreadable. "I am." The man chuckled to himself. "Just checking." Then came the drink service. Every Obsidian-class passenger was offered a flute of chilled champagne, except Malcolm. The junior flight attendant, the same one from earlier, moved through the rows with robotic cheerfulness, offering glasses to 1B, then 1C. She passed Malcolm without a word. He waited. When she circled back, he raised his hand. "No champagne for 1A?" She paused, startled. "Oh, I thought maybe you'd prefer something else. Orange juice?" Malcolm's voice was soft but unmistakably firm. "No. Champagne will be fine." Her eyes darted, unsure. She nodded and scurried off. From a nearby row, a woman leaned toward her husband and whispered, just loud enough. Maybe he upgraded last minute? Malcolm didn't look their way. He simply spoke aloud, clear enough for all to hear. "No, I booked this seat 6 weeks ago." They froze in awkward silence. Then, just 15 minutes before takeoff, a different flight attendant strolled down the aisle, distributing handwritten welcome notes from the captain, an Obsidian tradition. One for 1B, one for 1C, another for 2A, none for 1A. Malcolm asked, voice calm, "Was I missed?" The attendant glanced at her list, frowned. "You're Mr. Graves?" "Malcolm Wren," he corrected evenly. "Seat 1. "Oh, sorry," she murmured and walked away without offering one. Malcolm leaned back, eyes closed, pulse steady. It wasn't one thing, it was the accumulation, a series of subtle exclusions, each cloaked in plausible deniability. Paper cuts, one after another. 1,000 ways to say you don't belong here, without ever saying the words. He had the wealth, the status, the credentials, but none of it mattered, because they didn't expect it to show up in his skin. He wasn't just excluded. He was being erased, methodically, politely, quietly. Moments after takeoff, the captain's voice crackled over the intercom with the usual pleasantries. Then came something extra. "To honor one of our valued Obsidian guests, we'll be playing a little trivia game. Just a bit of fun and a token of appreciation." Malcolm raised an eyebrow. No one had mentioned this before. It wasn't on the welcome menu. It hadn't been announced in the lounge. Passengers chuckled, adjusted in their seats. The energy shifted. Then she appeared, the lead flight attendant, tall and poised, stepping down the aisle with a mic in one hand and cue cards in the other. Her name tag read Danica. Her voice was smooth honey, rehearsed and performative. "Let's liven things up, shall we?" she said with a bright smile. "A few quick questions about aviation. Winner gets a little bragging rights and a flight voucher." Laughter followed. Danica's gaze panned across the cabin, then, too deliberately, landed on Malcolm. "Let's begin with you, sir. Seat 1A. What's your name?" "Malcolm," he replied flatly. "Wonderful, Malcolm," she sang. "Here's your first question. What's the maximum cruising altitude of an Atheris A3 Exotic aircraft?" Before he could respond, a balding man in 1D muttered under his breath, "What is this, flight school?" Malcolm didn't react. His answer was smooth. 41,000 feet. Danica nodded, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. "Correct. Smart man." The mic moved on. A woman in 2C guessed the year Atheris was founded. A man in 1E tried his hand at identifying the tailwing structure. Light applause, chuckles, drinks clinking. Then Danica returned to Malcolm, her smile tighter this time. "Final round," she said. "And since our friend in 1A seems to know his stuff." Let's make this interesting." Her tone shifted. "Malcolm, what's the standard emergency protocol for Obsidian passengers in the event of an electrical fire originating mid-cabin?" The question landed like a lead weight. The cabin quieted. Someone in 3A snorted. Malcolm's gaze was ice. He held it directly on Danica. "That depends," he said coolly, "on whether protocol is followed or bent." Danica tilted her head, still smiling. "Meaning?" "Meaning," Malcolm said slowly, "some passengers don't get protocols. They get profiled." The laughter vanished. Her smile faltered. She clutched the mic a little tighter. "It's just a game, Mr. Wren." "So is this seat, apparently," he replied. A click. The mic went silent. The atmosphere changed. A line had been crossed, one that couldn't be unsaid. Danica cleared her throat and quickly declared someone else the winner. A man in 2D raised his hand half-heartedly. A few passengers clapped, but the energy had flattened. Eyes trailed Danica as she hurried back down the aisle. Malcolm didn't move. He sat tall, composed, watching. The game was over, but something far bigger had just begun. Malcolm didn't flinch. He didn't blink or shift. He simply remained, spine straight, hand still, gaze forward. The game had ended, but something else had begun. A fault line had opened. Across the aisle, a middle-aged woman leaned in and whispered to her husband, "Not everything's a statement." "Why so sensitive?" the man muttered. "It was a joke." Malcolm heard them. He always did. It never mattered how quiet the insult was. It always arrived. 15 minutes later, dessert was rolled out. A glossy tray gleamed with miniature indulgences: chocolate mousse, fruit tarts, sorbet. As the junior attendant, Elise, approached Malcolm's row, her demeanor shifted. Her voice became overly bright. "Oh," she chirped, "we're out of the mousse." Malcolm's eyes moved to the tray. "There were 4, he said calmly. "Are they not available?" She blinked, flustered. "Those are for the left side of the cabin." He didn't reply, just stared ahead. She lingered, unsure, then offered weakly, "I can bring you fruit instead?" "I didn't ask for fruit," Malcolm replied. She retreated. Moments later, the man in the checkered blazer leaned across again, his grin as smug as before. "Don't take it personal, buddy. Gotta admit, you kinda stand out up here." Malcolm turned his head, slow and deliberate. "Stand out?" The man chuckled. "Yeah, not a lot of folks with your flavor in 1A." A few around them chuckled too, nervous, complicit. Malcolm gave a thin smile. Not warm, not kind, just sharp enough. "You're right," he said. "I do stand out." He leaned in ever so slightly. "Just not for the reasons you think." The man's grin faded. The mood dimmed again. After that, the crew gave his row a wide berth. For 20 minutes, not a single attendant returned. When Malcolm pressed the call button, no one came. When he waved someone down, they promised to return. They didn't. A passenger from 2F, someone who'd been watching quietly, leaned toward him and said, "This doesn't feel right." Malcolm nodded once. "It isn't. Not yet." He said no more. He observed. He listened. He let them believe he was simply a quiet man with quiet wealth. They didn't realize the man they were trying to erase had designed the very systems their airline relied on. When he reopened his tablet, the onboard Wi-Fi greeted him with a message that made him pause. "We're sorry, your account is not eligible for Obsidian Tier Internet access." Malcolm blinked once, amused. The encrypted high-speed network reserved for elite passengers like him. Denied. He tapped Retry. The error reappeared. Across the aisle, 1B streamed live stock updates. 2C watched a documentary without interruption. Malcolm navigated to Settings, confirming once again that his Obsidian Elite status was active and tied to this reservation. He tapped the help icon. A generic response flashed, "Please contact a flight attendant for further assistance." So he did. When Elise finally returned, he gestured calmly toward his screen. "My internet access has been restricted. Can you confirm my account is still recognized as Obsidian?" She frowned at the screen. "That's strange," she said, genuinely puzzled. "You're clearly elite. It should have activated automatically." "It didn't," Malcolm said, "and I'd like to know why." Elise hesitated. "I'll check with someone." 10 minutes passed before she returned, with someone else. A slender man with stiff shoulders and a clipped voice stepped forward. His name tag read Dorian Kells. "Mr. Wren," he began, formal. "It seems there was a system flag placed on your profile." Malcolm tilted his head. "A flag?" "Yes, well, some security protocols were triggered, possibly a mismatch in profile data." Malcolm's tone stayed level. "Show me." Dorian blinked. "I'm afraid I can't. That level of access is back-end only." "Then escalate," Malcolm said. "I want this resolved. Now." Dorian nodded, lips pressed into a thin line, and walked away. Malcolm stared at the dimmed screen in front of him, then tapped into a secure partition of his device, a diagnostic tool he'd personally helped develop. It was designed for enterprise clients, built to test algorithmic fairness and AI logic integrity. He input parameters: high-tier user, internet access denial, system flag triggered. The program simulated the probability across 1,000 randomized elite users. The result appeared 0.03% likelihood, statistically impossible unless someone had tampered with the system. He ran it again, same result. This wasn't a glitch. It was deliberate. 0.03% chance. Malcolm ran the diagnostic again. Same result. The odds of this happening to any true Obsidian tier flyer were astronomically low, unless the pattern had been altered. Someone or something had tampered with the system. As his tool finished its second pass, another screen popped up. A message from the Aetheris Air mobile app. "Help us improve your flight experience. Rate your journey so far." The irony was almost theatrical. A faint smile tugged at the corner of Malcolm's mouth. He tapped Begin. The first prompt asked him to confirm his seat number. He selected 1A. The next screen loaded, but instead of questions, a message flashed. "Based on current data, you do not qualify for targeted feedback." He blinked. What did that even mean? He closed the survey. Then, with a few quiet taps, he accessed a hidden admin shell, something only developers or consultants would even know existed. Malcolm, of course, had helped design it. Scrolling through back-end logs, his eyes scanned lines of code. And then he saw it. Black. Not in data, in the comments. Human-coded, not an algorithmic accident, a decision. Behind him, he heard low voices near the galley. Dorian Kells, tight-collared, precision-spoken, was whispering to Elise. "He's getting suspicious," Dorian murmured. "What did you expect?" she whispered back. "They probably slipped him into Obsidian by mistake. Can't let him think he gets the same perks." Malcolm remained still, his expression unreadable, but the words buried like glass under skin. Slipped in by mistake. So that was the story. That was the excuse they were building. He tapped his watch. A small light blinked red, recording. He opened his encrypted messaging app and typed, "Live test complete. System-wide manipulation confirmed. Code 823 blackout, attaching log sample, initiate chain." He hit send. The message routed directly to his company's internal AI ethics cluster, a digital tribunal he had created for moments exactly like this. Then, without warning, his tablet screen went dark. A new message appeared. Your device has been temporarily disconnected due to a security review. Malcolm chuckled. Not from humor, from clarity. They were still trying to suppress his access, and they didn't know. They were up against the man who built the very frameworks they were now manipulating. A moment later, Elise reappeared, this time visibly unsettled. "Mr. Wren," she said quietly, "Mr. Kells asked me to let you know that your account was manually reset. Something about routing inconsistencies." Malcolm looked up. "Routing history?" She nodded awkwardly. "Apparently, your recent flight paths don't match the tier data." "Declared by who?" he asked. "The system, I think," she said. He leaned in slightly, his tone cool and exacting. "The system doesn't guess, Elise. People program systems." Before she could respond, the intercom chimed again. Danica Rowe's voice rang out like she was still performing in a training video. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for choosing Aetheris Air's Obsidian class. We'd like to take a moment to honor one of our frequent flyers with this month's Loyalty Distinction Award." Passengers perked up. A few straightened their posture. Eyes flicked toward the front, each hoping to hear their name. Malcolm didn't move. He already knew. "This month's recipient," Danica continued cheerfully, "is Mr. Bradley Knox, seated in 2A with over 120,000 miles logged this year." Polite applause followed. Someone whooped a little too loudly. Malcolm glanced casually toward 2A. Bradley, a white man in a rumpled blazer and open-collar shirt, stood awkwardly. He nodded, sheepish, and accepted a gold-trimmed gift bag. A camera clicked. "Congratulations again, Mr. Knox," Danica said, voice syrupy. "We're honored to have you." Malcolm blinked. Before they had locked him out, he had checked his own portal, 168,000 miles. He had flown 40% more than Bradley, not just more than him, more than anyone in this cabin, but not a word, not a nod, not even a glance. Because this wasn't about data, it was about optics. And Malcolm didn't fit theirs. As Danica walked past him, he spoke just loud enough for only her to hear. "How many miles did I fly this year?" She paused. Her eyes didn't meet his. "I wouldn't know, sir." "Yes, you do," Malcolm replied. "I saw the number before you disabled my access." She didn't answer. Didn't need to. Malcolm leaned back, eyes forward again, but inside, the fire was no longer quiet. It was calculating. "Sir," Danica said stiffly. "You do?" Malcolm replied, voice low but sharp. "Because I saw it, in the portal, before you revoked my access." He let the silence hang. 168,000 miles, he continued. "That's 40% more than your winner." Danica's jaw clenched. "I'm just following the event list, Mr. Wren." "Of course you are," Malcolm replied evenly. "And who made that list?" There was a pause. "That would be corporate." Malcolm looked at her, his gaze steady, unflinching. "No, that would be culture." Danica didn't reply. She walked past him, a little quicker than before. Behind her, Bradley Knox, still holding his prize bag, glanced down at it as if it had grown heavier in his hand. A new round of whispers began, but this time they carried a different weight, less gossip, more reckoning. The earlier air of performative civility had shifted into something thicker, more uncomfortable. A quiet awareness was spreading row by row. No one said it aloud, but they all felt it. Later, as the cabin settled, Malcolm opened a second tablet from his bag, one they hadn't blocked because they didn't know it existed. It was encrypted, silent, and still connected. Using credentials left over from a consulting role years earlier, he accessed the internal Aetheris Air event dashboard, the same one used to plan in-flight experiences. There, in the list of loyalty award candidates, his name had been first, flagged, confirmed, prioritized. And next to it, in the comment section, a short note. "Not the right image. Choose someone else." No name, just a timestamp. Malcolm took a screenshot, encrypted it, archived it to his expanding evidence file. Just then, a young male crew member passed by. He didn't make eye contact, just dropped a folded napkin onto Malcolm's tray table before moving on. Malcolm unfolded it. "We see it too. This isn't right. No seat number, no name, just truth, scribbled in pen." He folded the napkin, slid it into his coat pocket, and exhaled slowly. For years, people had told him that racism now was subtle. No more slurs or sirens, just algorithms, preferences, suggestions, optics. But what he saw today wasn't subtle. It was scalpel-sharp, methodical, and delivered with the full complicity of a crew trained to pretend it wasn't happening. By the time dinner service resumed, the cabin felt different. Some passengers no longer met his eyes. The smugness had melted into something more like shame. Others, farther back, kept glancing forward, unsure what exactly was unfolding, but aware that it mattered. One man, someone Malcolm recognized from a prior flight, a consultant who probably spoke at tech conferences about diversity as strategy, stood up during a lull and approached. He leaned down slightly. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "you should have gotten that award. I've seen your name on the lounge loyalty board more times than I can count." Malcolm looked up at him, not smiling. "Then, maybe," he said softly, "you should have said something when they handed it to someone else." The man blinked. "Yeah, maybe I should have." Malcolm was about to return to his diagnostics when his second tablet, independent, secured, never linked to Atheris's portal, went dark. A message flashed before the screen shut down. "This device is no longer authorized on this network." Malcolm paused. The device hadn't touched any part of the airline's systems, which meant someone was actively targeting him. He looked up. His expression didn't change, but his pulse sharpened. Seconds later, Elise returned. She didn't look like she was coming to offer service. She carried nothing but a nervous expression and a trembling cloth she didn't need. "Mr. Wren," she whispered, "I just got a message from the purser." Malcolm didn't blink. "There's been an issue with your seat assignment." His voice was flat. "An issue?" She nodded. "Apparently, your seat has been reassigned." Malcolm raised an eyebrow, not with surprise, with confirmation. "To where?" "They've moved you to 14D, in economy." For a moment there was stillness between them. Not social silence, strategic silence, like the calm before a controlled fire. "On what grounds?" he asked. "The system flagged your profile as high risk," she replied, her voice tight. "It cited non-compliant behavior, security triggers, unauthorized digital access." Malcolm leaned back slightly, his voice even as stone. "So now I'm not just an unqualified loyalty member." He paused. "I'm a threat." Elise lowered her gaze. "They just told me to deliver the message," she said softly. "They're sending someone to escort you to your new seat." Before the words had even settled, Dorian Kells appeared, flanked by a second uniformed staffer with the plastic smile of someone following policy while evading ethics. "For the comfort of all passengers," Dorian said, "we'll need your cooperation, Mr. Wren." Malcolm didn't move. "Define comfort," he replied, still seated. Dorian's eyes shifted to the crew member beside him. "Sir, failure to comply may result in removal at the next airport." Still, Malcolm stayed where he was. Then he reached into his coat, not for his encrypted tablet or backup device, but for his personal smartphone. He pressed record. "I'd like this on record," he said calmly, staring directly into Dorian's eyes. "That you are forcibly downgrading me mid-flight from a paid Obsidian 1A seat to economy based on unverifiable internal metrics and manipulated system triggers." Dorian stiffened. "This isn't personal, sir." Malcolm stood. "It never is." He stepped into the aisle. The energy shifted. Silence rippled out from him like a drop into still water. Heads turned. Passengers looked up from their wine, their screens, their dinners. A few started recording. Someone whispered, "What did he do?" Another, "They're moving him out of first class." Malcolm didn't respond. He walked, past rows of champagne glasses, reclining seats, silk eye masks, past whispered judgment and unspoken apologies. He reached 14D, a cramped middle seat wedged between a couple in mid-argument over window shade etiquette. He paused. An older flight attendant with a worn face glanced up in surprise. "You're in 14D?" she asked. "You're from first class?" "Apparently not anymore," Malcolm replied. She stepped aside. No apology, no explanation, just a shrug and a seatbelt. He sat down, shoulders still squared, composure unshaken. Reconnecting his phone to the open cabin Wi-Fi, still unblocked, he accessed a secure cloud interface linked to his corporate compliance server. He tapped a red icon labeled Deploy Observer Protocol. A prompt appeared. He typed one word, "Yes." 10 seconds later, his internal network AI began its silent sweep. It scanned the manifest, cross-checked passenger IDs, retrieved metadata from previously flagged flights, and started compiling an incident report in real time. This was no longer just about humiliation. This was evidence. Back in first class, Elise approached Dorian, her voice taut with unease. "He didn't resist," she whispered. Dorian nodded smugly. "He wouldn't dare. People like that make noise, but they never act." Elise bit her lip. "What if he files a complaint?" Dorian scoffed. "Then he'll get a 'We're sorry' email in 6 months and a $50 voucher. That's how this works." What Dorian didn't know was that his voice had been picked up 3 different ways. By Malcolm's phone, by a sympathetic passenger's hidden recording, and by the flight deck recorder, quietly triggered by a co-pilot who had overheard too much through the cabin channel. Too many ears were listening now. And one set belonged to Una Bradley, 2 rows behind Malcolm. She wasn't just a quiet passenger in glasses. She was an FAA compliance auditor, embedded under an alias, watching everything unfold. Her badge, half hidden beneath her blazer, now gleamed faintly from the corner of her tray. She didn't intervene yet. She documented. As Malcolm sat between strangers, elbows tight against 2 indifferent passengers, one of whom muttered, "Didn't think they let first-class folks fall this far," he stayed completely still. Not defeated, just calculating. His scan continued in the background. Quiet. Precise. Collecting logs, audio, cabin data, passenger tags, cross-system inconsistencies. The lie was no longer isolated. It was systemic, and Malcolm had eyes everywhere. Then, ping. A silent notification appeared on his phone's secure channel. Code discrepancy detected. VIP manifest mismatch confirmed. Malcolm's eyes narrowed. Whatever was happening wasn't just discrimination. It was something deeper. And he had just unlocked its first layer. The alert on Malcolm's screen pulsed again. VIP manifest discrepancy detected. 1 unregistered badge logged into Obsidian Vault. Malcolm blinked. The Obsidian Vault, Aetherius Air's most restricted onboard compartment, hidden behind the first-class galley, not visible from economy, not even accessible to business-class passengers. It was typically reserved for diplomats, intelligence personnel, or high-tier executives under heightened security protocols. But this time, according to his scan, a digital badge had been used to access the vault. A badge that matched no manifest entry. No name, no seat. Just access, an anomaly. A ghost. Malcolm's thoughts sharpened like a blade. Someone wasn't just in the vault. They had been deliberately let in. Without a word, he unbuckled his seatbelt. The man next to him glanced over. Curious. "Where are you going?" asked the woman on his other side, her tone laced with suspicion. "Stretching my legs?" Malcolm replied evenly. He stepped into the aisle and walked, past tray tables and earbuds and passengers watching movies with their heads tilted, unaware that something real was unfolding just rows away. As he reached the divider before business class, an older flight attendant stepped in front of him, stern-faced, voice clipped. "Sir, I'm afraid you're not allowed past this point." Malcolm met her gaze, polite but unyielding. "I need to speak with the flight supervisor." "You've been reassigned, sir," she replied quickly. "Please return to your seat." "Then ask the supervisor to come to me," he said, remaining exactly where he stood. Seconds later, Dorian Kells reappeared. His face was tight with irritation. "Mr. Wren, I thought we'd resolved this." "You resolved nothing," Malcolm said calmly. "You downgraded me under false pretenses, refused to justify it, and now you're denying access to a section I have every right to question." "That area is for high-security personnel only," Dorian said stiffly. Malcolm's eyes narrowed. "Then explain why it's listed as a crew-only galley in the manifest, and why your system shows a ghost badge logged inside." Dorian hesitated. "That's none of your concern." "When I'm forcibly removed from my paid seat and the section involved contains an unidentified person who bypassed security logs, it becomes my concern." The surrounding passengers were watching now. A man in 5A paused his video. A young woman pulled her earbuds out. Tension thickened in the air. Dorian leaned in, his voice dropping to a hiss. "You're escalating something you don't understand." Malcolm's response was ice. "You're right, you don't understand who you're dealing with." He turned on his heel, not back to economy, but toward the mid-cabin galley, where two junior attendants were arranging trays. "Excuse me," he said, calm as ever. "I need to speak to whoever is in charge of cabin security." One of them started to respond, flustered. "We're not really allowed to—" Malcolm raised a single hand. "Don't worry, they'll come." And he tapped his phone again. A silent signal deployed. A secure code routed through FAA internal channels. Exactly 60 seconds later, the woman in glasses from 2 rows behind him stood up. Una Bradley, FAA Compliance Auditor, Internal Audit Division. She moved without panic, without hesitation. Flashing her badge to the nearest crew member, she said clearly, "Auditor Bradley, step aside." And just like that, the chain of command cracked open. She walked straight past Dorian, who froze. Past Danica, still trying to maintain her performative smile for business class. Straight toward the obsidian vault. She knocked once, swiped her federal badge. The door slid open. What she saw inside made her stop. A man sat alone, dark gray suit, no airline insignia, no luggage, no boarding pass. A black briefcase rested at his feet. A tablet in his lap displayed a live encryption map of international satellite relays. This wasn't a passenger. This was a clandestine operation, and Malcolm had discovered it by being excluded. Back in economy, Malcolm stood near the service galley. Still. Hands relaxed at his sides. He didn't need to see inside. He already knew what they'd found. He didn't need to ask Una for confirmation. Her steps and the silence that followed spoke louder than any report. He had turned exclusion into exposure. He had baited their system, tracked their every move, forced their errors, triggered federal review in real time, and now, finally, the mask was cracking. Dorian Kells hadn't been seen in 10 minutes. His absence said more than any policy ever could. Danica hadn't returned to the aisle either. The crew was unraveling. And Malcolm Wren? He wasn't just a passenger anymore. He was the one rewriting the flight. Danica Rowe hadn't returned to the first-class lane. Malcolm stood near the front, watching junior crew members shuffle nervously in her absence. They moved quickly, eyes avoiding his. Their actions were hesitant, out of rhythm, like actors suddenly handed a script they had never rehearsed. That was the first crack. Fear, not from guilt, but from inexperience. These weren't the people trained to answer questions. They were trained to follow scripts. and the script had just been shredded. Malcolm began walking slowly toward the front, passing economy seats. He offered a subtle nod to Una Bradley, now standing near the cockpit door, quietly conferring with the co-pilot. She returned his nod with a glance, then looked down at her tablet. A new update had just landed. That's when the real shift came. The captain's voice came over the intercom, steady, seasoned, but the words were off. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your continued patience. Due to a sudden adjustment in airspace clearance, we've received a direct order from Ethirus headquarters. We're rerouting slightly and will provide further updates soon. Malcolm's jaw tightened. Too controlled. Too polished. That wasn't operational turbulence. That was corporate panic. He recognized the tone instantly, the voice of PR intervention. They knew. As he stood in the aisle, just a few feet from where he'd once sat in Obsidian 1A, he pulled out his phone and tapped a pre-programmed push to his assistant. Code Silvergate. Initiated. Schedule board. Prepare video. Stage release. It was time. Exactly 3 minutes later, Danica Rowe reappeared. Her face had changed. Gone was the smirk, the manufactured grace. She looked pale now, held together, but only just. Her voice had lost its edge. "Mr. Wren," she said, almost a whisper, "we'd like to apologize for the misunderstanding earlier. If you're willing to return to your original seat, we've made arrangements." "No," Malcolm interrupted, calm, measured, unshakable. "You didn't remove me by mistake," he said, voice low but resonant. "You removed me by design." "I'm not going back to that seat because someone finally realized who I am," Danica faltered. "I was just asked to pass along the instructions." "I know," Malcolm replied. "That's what everyone here does. They follow scripts." He stepped slightly closer, his voice never rising. "So tell me, at what point did you decide I didn't belong?" Her breath caught. "When you saw my face? Or when your system suddenly forgot every single marker of my identity?" He turned now, facing the cabin. The same cabin that had watched him be demoted, degraded, dismissed. "My name," he said clearly, "is Malcolm Wren. I'm the founder and CEO of Stratus Core Technologies, the lead vendor behind Ethirus Air's behavioral intelligence systems." Dead silence. "The biometric profiling software that evaluates passenger behavior. We built it. The customer loyalty framework that determines elite tier thresholds. Licensed from us. And the predictive AI you embedded 2 quarters ago to flag risk behavior? That came from my desk." Heads turned. Some passengers blinked. Others shifted, suddenly uncomfortable, in their leather recliners. The woman who had whispered about people like him turned bright red and stared at her cutlery. The man who laughed when Malcolm was reassigned now looked frozen, scrolling his phone, likely fact-checking what he'd just heard. Malcolm didn't gloat. He didn't smile. "I didn't speak earlier," he continued, "because I needed to see, to observe. Now I've seen enough." From the cockpit, Una Bradley stepped forward, her FAA badge now visible. "Mr. Wren," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "we've confirmed an unauthorized override in the manifest. A trust zone breach has occurred. The individual housed in the Obsidian Vault has been identified as a third-party contractor. No security clearance, no legal authorization to occupy a classified seat." She paused. "We're rerouting to a secured hub for full federal investigation." Malcolm nodded once. "Thank you." Danica stepped back, her composure slipping. I didn't know who you were." "That," Malcolm said, looking straight through her, "is exactly the problem." "You didn't know who I was," Malcolm said evenly. "That's the problem. You shouldn't have had to." At that moment, the overhead screens across the aircraft flickered, every screen in every cabin. System-wide notice public statement from Ethirus HQ scheduled for broadcast upon landing. Immediate debrief requested with Wren, Stratus core team. The air inside first class shifted. The hush that once cloaked the elite like a luxury scent dissolved into murmurs, questions, quiet gasps, fragments of guilt. The silence of comfort was gone. People were talking, whispering, wondering. Malcolm didn't return to 1A. He walked instead to the open jump seat near the galley and sat down, not for convenience, but for optics. He wanted them to see him there, the man they had tried to erase, the man they had tried to downgrade into silence. The moment Malcolm Wren spoke his name and revealed who he was, the balance of the flight ruptured. It wasn't turbulence that shifted the cabin, it was truth. His identity didn't just shock the passengers, it shattered the illusion Ethirus Air had spent years building. That luxury was a meritocracy, that its systems were fair, and that the ones excluded simply hadn't earned their place. But Malcolm knew better. One sharp revelation didn't dismantle a machine fueled by generational bias, not alone. So, as he sat still in the jump seat, arms folded, eyes steady, he tapped into his secure uplink and deployed the next phase. Silvergate. Distribution. Within seconds, the encrypted folder he had built across the flight, logs, diagnostics, audio, timestamps, began auto-uploading to legal holding servers, internal ethics boards, regulatory accounts, and most importantly, Stratus Core's global PR division, which had been waiting on standby. Across the country, in a glass tower office high above downtown Chicago, a media director's phone lit up with a silent directive. Go! Press publish! She did. A 2-minute and 36-second short-form video hit every major social platform at once. It showed the forced downgrade, the champagne denial, the fake system flag, the ghost entry in the manifest. Dorian calling Malcolm a problem with the wrong image. Danica's whisper, he doesn't fit the brand. While Flight 392 still cruised at 37,000 feet, the video hit 1.2 million views. 20 minutes later, it was at 5 million. Athletes reposted it. Tech CEOs commented. Civil rights leaders stitched it. The trending hashtag, our Wren in the Wings comments poured in. He built their system, and they used it against him. Representation in tech matters. This is why. They kicked out the architect because of his skin. Back on board, Danica's earpiece buzzed. She turned ghost white. The director of in-flight operations was on the line. Malcolm heard her whisper, strained. Yes, sir, I had no idea he was recording. Yes, I understand. I'm so sorry. She turned toward Malcolm, her lips parted, maybe to apologize, maybe to explain. He didn't look at her. She no longer mattered. She wasn't the enemy. She was the symbol, and that symbol was now cracking from within. Elsewhere on the plane, another shift unfolded. 17C, a young man in a hoodie, earbuds half out, stood up and walked toward Malcolm. He held his phone in his hand. On the screen was a paused video. The same video. Sir, he said quietly, I recorded everything that happened when they pulled you out of 1A. He looked down. The way they looked at you, the stuff they said, I didn't know what I'd do with it, but now I do. Malcolm glanced at the screen. The angle was perfect. The audio, impeccable. He nodded once. Send it. The young man did, then returned to his seat, with his head held higher. Charles. Moments later, the cabin chime sounded, but it wasn't the captain or the crew. It was a corporate override, a crisp, well-trained voice patched in over the speaker system. To all passengers aboard Flight 392, this is the Vice President of Customer Experience for Ethirus Air. We've been made aware of a matter involving one of our Obsidian guests. We wish to extend our sincerest apologies to Mr. Malcolm Wren. A full investigation has been launched. Effective immediately, the staff involved will be relieved of duty upon landing. Thank you for your patience. Heads turned everywhere. Passengers looked at one another, suddenly unsure where they stood in this unfolding story. One man in first class pulled out his phone, Googling Malcolm Wren in real time. Another woman murmured, "He's the guy who built the AI they use?" Someone else whispered, "Why would they risk doing that to him?" And Malcolm Wren, he sat silently in the galley jump seat. No gloating, no smile, because this wasn't vindication, this was exposure. And the world was now watching. Passengers stared at each other, wide-eyed. A man in 3A shifted awkwardly, clearly trying to remember if he had laughed earlier. A woman in 2B murmured, "I think that was the CEO talking." Further back, someone checked their trending tab. "Oh my God," she whispered aloud. "He owns 20% of the airline." Meanwhile, inside Ethirus Air's corporate tower in downtown Chicago, panic spread like fire. In the executive boardroom, a massive display monitor was frozen on a still frame of Malcolm Wren's face. Below it, real-time social sentiment feeds scrolled like a landslide. The PR director turned to the CEO, voice taut with dread. "We've lost control of the narrative. Stock is down 6% and falling. Media outlets are pushing the video faster than we can respond." CEO Ronald Beckett stood rigid at the head of the table, fists clenched at his sides. "We need a statement from the board, preferably with Wren at the table." "He already owns enough to demand a seat," someone muttered. Another executive added, "This isn't about optics anymore. He could take the company public or burn it down." Beckett's jaw flexed. "Then let's hope he wants the former." Back at 37,000 feet, Malcolm's phone buzzed in his lap. A private number. He answered without hesitation. "Wren." The voice on the other end tried to stay calm. "Mr. Wren, this is Ronald Beckett. On behalf of Ethirus Air, I want to personally apologize." Malcolm cut him off. "You're not talking to a victim," he said coldly. "You're talking to your largest strategic threat. I'll deal with you when I land. Until then, prepare your board." As Flight 392 began its descent into a secured FAA-coordinated terminal just outside Chicago, Malcolm sat poised in the forward jump seat. His phone blinked quietly. Message after message. Updates from legal, ethics, PR, and his own executive team at Stratus Core. Across the cabin, no one discussed business deals anymore. No one compared stock tips. The conversations had shifted. They were whispering about him. About the man who turned a live flight into a case study in algorithmic injustice. In real time. Behind him, Una Bradley stood near the cockpit, coordinating with ground control. Her voice was calm. Her presence, the definition of federal oversight. The flight attendants no longer moved with confident hospitality. They hesitated, fumbled, avoided. Their choreography was broken. Danica Rowe sat stiffly in her fold-down seat by the emergency exit, her hands clasped in her lap, her face drained. Dorian Kells was nowhere to be seen. The wheels touched down with a soft groan of rubber meeting tarmac. The jet taxied toward a roped-off gate flanked by 2 security vehicles and 3 black SUVs. One bore the FAA seal, another displayed the Stratus Core insignia. The third, unmarked, but pulsing with urgency. Inside, as the cabin doors unsealed, a uniformed supervisor stepped in. He didn't even glance at the crew, he spoke only to the passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "due to an ongoing federal investigation tied to this flight, we are initiating a tiered deplaning process. Please remain seated." Danica glanced once at Malcolm, then at the advancing officials. A man in a gray blazer approached, holding a tablet. "Danica Rowe?" he asked. She nodded faintly. "You are being relieved of duty, pending regulatory investigation and disciplinary review." Her mouth opened. I was just following protocol." "That," the man said, "is exactly the problem." Two other attendants, the ones who had skipped Malcolm's champagne, ignored his call button, played games with his dignity, were escorted out next. Then came Dorian Kells, emerging from the lavatory, his shirt rumpled, his expression hollow. He passed Malcolm without meeting his eyes, muttering, "It wasn't personal." Malcolm didn't flinch. He didn't need an apology from a sinking ship. Outside, a crowd had gathered behind barricades. Cameras were rolling. The news had broken, fully. Not just that Ethirus Air had demoted one of its own elite flyers mid-flight, but that the very architect of its behavioral AI system had been targeted by that same system. Reporters shouted over each other, trying to confirm the headline that had already exploded online. Airline downgrades its own tech vendor over racial bias. Exposed live mid-flight. But several major outlets were already calling it the most sophisticated case of digital profiling ever caught on record. And Malcolm Wren, he was just getting started. The most sophisticated act of digital profiling ever caught in real time. That was the headline flashing across global outlets. Inside Ethirus Air's executive suite, the tension was suffocating. A full emergency board meeting had been called. CEO Ronald Beckett stood at the head of the table, his voice sharp, the air around him electric with dread. "The damage is beyond public relations," he said tightly. "Stratus Core holds 21% of our Class A voting stock. With the new shareholder protections, Malcolm Wren can trigger a full executive review. No notice, no mercy." He scanned the room, filled with directors who suddenly looked far less confident in their corner offices. "If we don't act now, this company becomes a pariah overnight." The director of compliance didn't wait to raise her hand. "It's already happening. We've lost 4 partnership renewals this morning. Sentiment is down 79% across every platform. Employee morale is bottoming out. We can't even fill a recruiter callback list." Another director added quietly, "The unions just filed for a formal discrimination audit across all branches." Beckett turned to the head of HR. "Is the internal terminations package ready?" She nodded solemnly. "Yes. Effective immediately, we've terminated 6 flight staff involved, including Danica Rowe and Dorian Kells. 5 back-end engineers connected to the loyalty profiling system have been suspended pending investigation." Beckett hesitated. "And the General Counsel?" The room went quiet. A voice finally broke the silence. "She signed off on the algorithm last quarter." Beckett exhaled hard. "Then she's out too." Back on the tarmac, Malcolm Wren walked calmly through the private security corridor, flanked by Stratus Core legal advisors and Una Bradley, now acting in an official FAA oversight capacity. A young Ethirus representative, clipboard shaking slightly, stepped into his path. "Mr. Wren, the board is requesting an immediate closed-door dialogue. They're prepared to issue a full apology, executive resignations, equity restructuring, whatever you need to correct this." Malcolm paused. He looked the young man in the eyes. "They're not prepared," he said. "They're afraid." The representative stammered, We just want to do the right thing." "You can't correct what you haven't acknowledged," Malcolm said, voice even. "Until then, you're not in a conversation. You're in a crisis. I'm in control." Inside the boardroom, the executives waited. No one spoke. When Malcolm entered, they stood. He didn't invite them to sit. He didn't need to. "You built your brand," he said slowly, "on the illusion of premium inclusion. But what you've sold is exclusion dressed as preference." "What happened to me today," he continued, "happens to people without power, without platforms, every single day. and you've built your profit margins on their silence. Beckett started to speak. Mr. Wren, let me begin by saying, "You'll begin," Malcolm said, cutting him off, "by listening." He let the silence hang. There will be no statements, no committees, no performative apologies. There will be restructuring. There will be oversight. There will be reparations. And there will be consequences. Dodobi Tononto. 3 weeks later, Malcolm Wren stepped out of that boardroom, and the entire industry felt the tremor. Headlines still swirled, but now the tone had changed, from scandal to transformation. Ethirus Air, once a symbol of exclusive travel, was entering what journalists called its redemption phase. An across-the-board overhaul had begun. Paritora. In his Chicago headquarters, Malcolm reviewed a third-stage compliance dashboard projected floor-to-ceiling on the walls of Stratus Core. Across the table sat Una Bradley, now embedded as a full-time federal observer within Ethirus's restructuring team. Beside her were the new interim Ethirus executives. They were diverse, carefully vetted, not selected for optics, but for accountability. And not a single one of them looked away when Malcolm spoke. The press called it Ethirus Air's redemption era. But inside the walls of Stratus Core's Chicago headquarters, it was simply called Compliance, Stage 3. On a curved wall-to-wall screen, Malcolm Wren reviewed the latest updates. Every policy reform, every training checkpoint, every biometric audit logged in real time. Beside him sat Una Bradley, now officially assigned as the FAA's embedded observer within Ethirus's restructuring team. Across the conference table sat the new interim Ethirus leadership team, diverse, competent, and no longer hiding behind buzzwords or press-safe generalities. Malcolm's demands had been non-negotiable. And now? Every Ethirus employee, from C-suite to baggage crew, was enrolled in mandatory bias immersion training, designed by Stratus Core's Ethical AI division. The program, called Empathos, wasn't a slideshow. It was a digital mirror. It used neural mapping, simulation modules, and behavioral diagnostics to show employees exactly what it felt like to be profiled, dismissed, or dehumanized in real time. Resistance was fierce at first, especially from those who had spent years operating comfortably within the walls of unspoken hierarchy. But Malcolm hadn't built EmpathOS to make them comfortable. He built it to make them honest. And slowly, honesty began to take root. Tomando Ansia. Meanwhile, the original crew from Flight 392 had all but vanished from the skies. Danica Rowe, once the face of first-class poise, was now enrolled in Stratus Core's Redemption Pathway, a program not of punishment, but of accountability. She sat in weekly modules, forced to relive her decisions on that flight in simulated recreations. She watched her own voice. "He doesn't fit the brand," looped on a screen. At first, she argued, "I was following orders." But something eventually cracked. She didn't apologize to Malcolm. He didn't need it. She apologized to the people she never remembered by name, the ones who were denied dignity by automation and silence. Dorian Kells, the one who orchestrated the downgrade, fared worse. Fired. Blacklisted. He later applied for a logistics job at a regional carrier. Under reason for leaving previous employer, he typed, "Exposed by the man I underestimated." He never got a call back. Ethirus, however, changed. The airline's new campaign slogan wasn't a glossy tagline, it was a promise. Everyone deserves a sky. No actors, no models, just real passengers, telling real stories of when they weren't believed, heard, or seen. Behind the scenes, Malcolm had ensured the shift wasn't just surface level. Stratus Core embedded a live bias monitoring system into Ethirus operations, flagging patterns, alerting auditors, triggering internal reviews the moment a complaint was filed. This wasn't PR. This was permanent infrastructure. On a crisp October morning, the new Etheris CEO, a Latina executive who had once led an airline equity coalition, invited Malcolm to join their advisory board. He declined. Instead, he nominated a rotating representative from the Passenger Equity Council. "I don't need to sit in your boardroom," Malcolm told her. "I need to make sure no one ever has to sit where I did." Sorry. Months later, at a public ethics summit in Washington, D.C., Malcolm stood before a packed auditorium of regulators, industry leaders, and lawmakers. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't rehearse. He just told the truth. "Justice," Malcolm said into the microphone, "is not the punishment of a few visible villains. It's the dismantling of invisible systems, the ones that allow villainy to feel like protocol. You don't fix that by firing people. You fix it by rewriting the rules, repurposing the tools, and requiring that decency be as measurable as profit." The room rose in standing ovation, but for Malcolm, that wasn't the point. The point was what happened after, like the black schoolteacher in Houston who flew Obsidian class and was greeted by name, or the hijabi woman in Seattle who asked to change seats and wasn't questioned once, or the single father in Newark who was upgraded after a delay and walked into 1A holding a brown-skinned toddler in his arms. No one blinked, no one questioned it, no one made it feel like it didn't belong. The world hadn't changed overnight, but thanks to Malcolm Wren, it had finally started to try.